All right. Hey there, friends. Good morning. Hope you're doing well this morning. Welcome to another weekday Bible study, and man, I'm excited. I'm so excited for today. I've been reading the text and working through it a little bit, and it's just it's so good, so good. And so I'm excited to do that. A small typo I noticed there. Look at that. I already failed. It's Jonah 1:4 through 17. Bam, we can fix that. And yeah, I'm excited for it, right? I'm excited to hang out with you, to read through this with you. If you weren't with us yesterday, I'm going to go ahead and start and cover just a little bit yesterday and kind of set the scene for our friends who might be joining us for the first time today. So, we yesterday, we were beginning in the book of Jonah, and as we read, Jonah is a Hebrew man, and he's a messenger of God. He's a prophet, right? And God comes to Jonah, and he gives him like this call. He wants Jonah to go to Nineveh, and to tell Nineveh about the Lord, right? He wants Jonah to spread his message in Nineveh. Jonah hates the Ninevites. He hates them, and what we see is a man who's called to go to a place to where he just truly does not want to go. That's what we see there, and so he decides instead. The Bible tells us instead of going to Nineveh, he gets on a boat bound for Tarshish. And the opposite direction, and he, quote, this is what the Bible says, he flees the Lord. He runs from the Lord. And so literally he runs from the Lord's call because he refuses to go to those people in Nineveh. And this is a great beginning of a conversation for our culture today, right? To whom, if God were to call you, would you not go? That's the question that we had to ask ourselves, right? Where could God call you that you would not go? Where would God call you that you would be so uncomfortable? He's trying to give up his position, really, is what he's trying to do. He no longer wants to be a prophet if God is going to call him to that place. What prejudices do you carry that would call you to let go of God's call on your life? And so that was a big question from yesterday. Today we're going to continue his story. We're going to start reading in verse 4, and we're going to read through the end of the chapter. It's great. It's a great read. It's a great story. You probably know it. I don't know if you've read it before, so let's read it. It says, "But the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship," that's the ship that Jonah is on, right? He got on a boat headed for Tarshish, "so that the ship threatened to break up. Then the mariners were afraid, and each cried out to his God, and they hurled the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone down in the inner part of the ship and had laid down and was fast asleep." All right, I'm going to stop there. And let's talk about what's happening. Okay, so what's really happening here is God is causing this storm. There's this giant storm that they've come across on this boat, right? I mean, that's really what's happening here. And I think it's interesting that the Bible tells us that the mariners were afraid. They called them by title to let us know that, like, this is not your average everyday storm at sea. Like, these guys, they would know how to handle a storm, right? This is something extraordinary for them. It's such a storm. The ship threatened to break up. The mariners were afraid. In fact, each mariner was calling out to his own God, which tells us that these people also are Gentiles. These people also are pagans, right? That's what this tells us. Interesting to me, Jonah had such a prejudice to take God's message to the Gentiles that God called him to. However, he was willing to put his life in the hands of these Gentiles as long as he didn't have to spread the message of God. That's very interesting. It says that they hurled the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it. They were throwing everything overboard, yet somehow Jonah didn't notice. And whenever the Bible tells us that Jonah was asleep, right? He was fast asleep. It's almost like a trance is what you would see in the original language. Like he was almost like medically asleep. Like this really takes us back to creation, where God causes the man to fall into a deep sleep so that he can take the rib from the side of the man and form woman. That is the same type of sleep that Jonah is in here. This is a supernatural nap. I've never taken a supernatural nap. I've taken really good naps. I'd like to experience a supernatural nap at some point in my life, because that just sounds like you would wake up so refreshed. But that's what's going on here. He's in this God's obviously telling us that God is causing the storm, and that God is allowing these pagans to call out to their gods, and God is causing Jonah to be super deep asleep because God wants these people to be afraid, right? So the captain, in verse 6, the captain came and said to him, Jonah, what do you mean, you sleeper? Arise, call out to your God. Perhaps the God will give a thought to us that we may not perish. Now, I think that is awesome, because that says a lot, right? This is a captain who doesn't believe in the one true God. This is a captain who doesn't believe in Jonah's God. This is a captain who is calling everybody to call out to their individual God. Yet this captain knows so much about prayer, right? Knows so much about prayer. It's really, really huge, right? We like to think in terms of prayer being like this idea where I go to grandpa with my Christmas list, or maybe it's my opportunity to tell God what I think God should do, and then God better listen to me. And this man understands, listen, call out to your God, and maybe he'll give us that attention that we're calling for, right? Maybe he will go our way, right? And that's what it is, right? Sometimes we call out to God for something and it doesn't always go the direction that we think it should, because in prayer, right, we're calling out to a God who obviously is bigger, bolder, wiser, smarter than us, and sometimes things don't go our way, and that's okay. Call out to your God, and perhaps your God will give a thought to us that we may not perish. Verse 7, nothing seems to have worked, right? And so they decide to cast lots. They said to one another, come, let us cast lots, that we may know on whose account this evil has come upon us. So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. Interestingly, casting lots is something that they do a lot in the Old Testament, talk about a lot in the Old Testament. It's this idea where if you practice something the right way, God will make the decision for you. Now, these are Gentiles casting lots, yet God went ahead and worked through their lot casting and pointed out exactly what was going on here. We don't see lot casting a lot in the New Testament. In fact, the only time that we see it is whenever they're choosing which disciple will replace Judas. They cast lots for that, but otherwise it's not really a big New Testament concept. So they cast lots, a lot fell on Jonah. Verse 8, they said to him, tell us on whose account this evil has come upon us. What is your occupation? Where do you come from? What is your country? And of what people are you? Right? They want to know, if we're going to die because of you, who are you? Right? Who are you that we should be dying for you? He said to them, I'm a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. Then the men were exceedingly afraid and said to him, what is this thing you have done? For the men knew that he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord, for he had told them. Then they said to him, what shall we do with you, that the sea may quiet down for us? For the sea grew more and more tempestuous. He said to them, pick me up and hurl me into the sea. Then the sea will quiet down for you, for I know it's because of me that this great tempest has come upon you. Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to get back to dry land, but they could not, for the sea grew more and more tempestuous against them. Therefore they called out to the Lord, O Lord, let us not perish for this man's life, and lay not on us innocent blood, for you, O Lord, have done it as it pleased you. So they picked up Jonah hurled him into the sea, and the sea ceased from its raging. Then the men feared the Lord exceedingly, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord, and they made vows. Here's what's interesting. I find a couple of things very interesting. Okay, very, very interesting here. The first thing that I find extremely interesting in this passage is that the men do everything they can to save Jonah's life. I find that very interesting. These are not men of faith in the one true God. So why is life so important to them? Have you thought about that? Like, Jonah tells them early on, like very quickly, throw me into the sea. It's me. Throw me into the sea. And they're like, no, we don't want to do that. We don't want to see you die today, right? That's what's going on inside of them. Like they don't want to be part of that execution process, right? So that says instead of throwing him into the sea, they row harder. Like they fight and they fight and they fight to protect this man's life. When finally they realize that no matter how hard they fight, they're not going to win, then they call out to God and they're like, God, please don't let this weigh on us. Like, please don't let this curse us. We don't want to do this, right? You know, why do they care so much about the sixth commandment, yet they don't even know it's a commandment? Think about that for a minute. From where does our morality come, if not from God, right? These men know not God, yet they know that this is not the way things should have to be. I find that incredibly interesting, and I hope that you do too. I hope that you realize that there's something inside of us, right? That moral reality that lives inside of all humans, right? That exists within us. That comes from somewhere, right? And I tell you exactly where it comes. God tells us in creation, He created us in His image, in His likeness, right? That comes directly from our Creator, right? But then the other thing that I find incredibly interesting here, is that Jonah ran away from Nineveh because Jonah did not want to see God's kingdom and message spread to the Gentiles. Yet he fled to a boat manned by Gentiles, found himself in the middle of a crazy, chaotic storm, almost rescued by Gentiles as they strived not to kill him. And then the ultimate result of Jonah's running and being thrown into the sea and the storm being calmed and these men hearing of Jonah's God is that the Bible tells us that they feared the Lord exceedingly, which doesn't mean that they were afraid of who God was. What that means is that they worshiped God for who He was and what He had done, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. In other words, right, Jonah's prejudices aside, the will of God will be done, right? It will be done. I just think that's amazing, right? The very thing Jonah didn't want to see happen. Jonah did not want to see the Gentiles come into a relationship with God. Jonah caused to happen the moment he bought a ticket and boarded the boat. I just think it's amazing. And then verse 17, it's cliffhanger, to be continued. And the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow up Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. If this was like 1992 right now, and it was TGIF, like this moment on the screen, it would say, to be continued. If you like this video, give us a thumbs up. If you would, leave us a comment. Let us know how we're doing. If you want to subscribe to this channel, that'd be great. You can also click the bell icon to receive notifications when we go live. And as always, we say here on the Worship Hangover, sharing is caring. Thanks so much for joining us. Love you. I'll see you tomorrow.